Remarkable allegation today about the #2 man in the Department of Justice, the Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein. According to the paper, in the spring of 2017, in the middle of a meeting, Rosenstein proposed secretly recording the president in an effort apparently to expose chaos with the administration and to discredit it. The Times also says that Rosenstein talked about recruiting members of the cabinet to invoke the 25th Amendment and remove the president from office in a kind of internal coup. Rosenstein has denied this story, but almost nobody in Washington seems to believe him. That's not surprising. Rosenstein is not a particularly popular person here. He's also a permanent federal bureaucrat, a group that has been working to undermine the president since the inauguration. So those are two strikes against him. But none of that means the story is true. Before you decide whether it is, consider where it came from and why it was published now. The piece seems to be based on notes that FBI employees Lisa Page and Andy McCabe typed up after a meeting with Rosenstein. Only McCabe's notes mention anything about the 25th Amendment. He is obviously the core source for this story. So if it's a question of deciding between Rod Rosenstein and Andy McCabe, who are you going to believe? It's not a great choice, admittedly, but it's also not a close call. McCabe was fired from the FBI for leaking and then lying about it. Federal prosecutors are looking now at the evidence. McCabe could soon be indicted for that. He has every incentive to want to see the president impeached. How could he get the president impeached? Well, he might start by leaking this story to a reporter called Adam Goldman at the New York Times, a reporter whom his coworkers believe he's been leaking to for a long time. He'd do that knowing that the story might cause the president to fire Rod Rosenstein. Democrats have long argued that firing Rosenstein would constitute obstruction of justice. That's an impeachable offense. Come November, assuming they take the House, Democrats will be in a position to do that, to file impeachment charges. Even if they don't impeach, the story would doubtless drive the president crazy and sow division within the White House. Perfect. A punji stick placed right in Trump's path. Is that what actually happened? We can't say for sure what happened. But if you were laying a trap for Donald Trump, this might be exactly how you do it. Before moving forward, the president might ask himself, why do Andy McCabe and the New York Times want me to fire Rod Rosenstein? And why do they want me to do it now rather than a year ago? When your enemies give you political advice, it's worth asking questions like that. Fox correspondent Kristen Fisher has been following all today's news, and she joins us tonight in studio.
Hey, Tucker. Yeah, it's a complicated story,
yes,
even for those of us that follow it. So just to bring all of you up to speed, let's start at the very beginning, because this all started with that New York Times report claiming that the Deputy Attorney General, Rod Rosenstein, had contemplated secretly recording the president at a meeting with top DOJ officials in May of 2017. Remember, that's right after President Trump had fired FBI Director James Comey. Well, citing anonymous sources, the Times also claims that Rosenstein discussed recruiting cabinet members to invoke the 25th Amendment to remove Mr. Trump from office. Well, in response to all of this, Rosenstein put out a statement saying, quote, the New York Times' story is inaccurate and factually incorrect. But let me be clear about this. Based on my personal dealings with the president, there is no basis to invoke the 25th Amendment. So Rosenstein calls the story inaccurate, but you'll note he doesn't categorically deny it. And that's likely, or could be, because according to our justice producer, Jake Gibson, who spoke with a DOJ official who was in that room during the meeting, Rosenstein did say something like that, but he was joking. He was allegedly in the middle of a heated exchange with then acting FBI Director Andrew McCabe. The source says, and this is a direct quote, the statement about secretly recording the president was sarcastic and was never discussed with any intention of recording a conversation with the president. Well, as you might imagine, already some Democrats and some Republicans on Capitol Hill are worried that this could lead to the Deputy Attorney General's firing. But so far tonight, at least publicly, the White House is not weighing in, Tucker.
Probably a lot of conversation behind the scenes, I would think.
I would imagine so.
Kristen Fisher, thank you for that.
Thanks for having me.
Republican Congressman Matt Gaetz represents the state of Florida, and he joins us tonight. Congressman, thanks a lot for coming on. So this is no defense of Rod Rosenstein, who's never struck me as someone I would trust personally. But does it seem odd that both the New York Times and Andy McCabe clearly would like the president to fire Rod Rosenstein? So what does that tell you?
Well, we're only going to find out the truth if we're able to get Rod Rosenstein under oath to explain what he said and the context. There appears to be no denial that he talked about wiretapping the president. So now we're supposed to believe the insurance policy wasn't really an insurance policy. The secret society didn't really exist. This is just sarcasm when you're talking about taping the president. And when they said, we'll stop him, they didn't mean they'd stop Donald Trump. They meant that America would rise to its greatest virtues. So I guess we can either believe the lion Department of Justice or our lion eyes.
So, again, I don't want this to come off as some sort of defense of permanent DOJ personnel, whom, as I've said many times, I would not trust. On the other hand, consider this. So Andy McCabe apparently is under investigation by the U.S. Attorney in D.C. based on that IG report from DOJ that said that he leaked and lied about it. So he could be indicted. If that's true, and I think it is, then no one at DOJ could call Andy McCabe a liar without invalidating the case. In other words, the prosecutor can't call the person he's charging a liar before the case, or a judge will throw it out. So maybe they can't actually deny this for that reason.
Well, there were other people in the room, Tucker. I've had sources who've said Scott Schools was in the room and that he's the other anonymous source cited in the New York Times piece. So let's bring Scott Schools back from his Uber job. Let's bring Rod Rosenstein down. Why not put him under oath and ask them? And if we're if we're afraid to do that as a Republican Congress, then we are derelict in our oversight responsibilities. We got to find out if they how appropriate. Let's assume it was a joke, Tucker. How appropriate is it for the Deputy Attorney General to be joking about wiretapping the president while he's overseeing an investigation of the president in front of his colleagues and subordinates? Roseanne Barr got fired for a joke, and frankly, I think Rod Rosenstein might too.
Interesting. So I want to ask you, speaking of the Congress's obligations as an oversight body, these documents pertaining to the Russia investigation, particularly the FISA warrant that allowed the Obama administration to spy on Carter Page, we were promised that they would be declassified. And apparently the permanent bureaucracy has prevented that from happening. It's deeply frustrating to those of us who believe in transparency and openness and the public's right to know the details of what its government is doing behind its back. Can anything be done about this, or is it final?
Well, I think that there were some who convinced the president that since the Inspector General is already looking at this content, that if the Inspector General finishes, it will all come out anyway. That's frustrating for guys like us who want to turn all the cards face up on the table. But I do have great confidence that Michael Horowitz will get to the bottom of this and will issue a fair report. So we may have to wait a little longer than we would have liked, but I don't think that the deep state's going to be able to hide behind their inappropriate redactions for too long.
So let me just ask one final question. And I think you're absolutely right. Everything in the end becomes known. Nothing is hidden forever. So when these documents are finally released to the people who own them, which is to say the American people, and it turns out that none of the things that were redacted were actually questions of national security, but merely butt covering by federal employees, will all the people who lied about it get punished? Because they should.
Well, they've never been punished before. When we had text messages redacted just because Peter Strzok was friends with a judge or Andy McCabe bought a $60,000 conference table, there were no consequences. There was no punishment. We just sort of threw our hands in the air and lost trust in their ability to do their own redactions. But time and again, bureaucrats redact information that's embarrassing to them, that the American people have a right to know. And that's why we've got to continue to fight for Congress to have a robust oversight role.
Nicely put. Congressman, thanks very much for joining us tonight.
Thank you, Tucker.
Well, the Brett Kavanaugh